Our last photo composition principle that we're going to talk about is probably the most universal and most widely used, and that is known as the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds, as you're going to see here in a second when I show you some examples, simply has you divide the photo frame into a grid of thirds, both horizontally and vertically. And when you do that, there are even some cameras that will, as a feature, they can project a grid onto the viewfinder so that you can kind of do that as you take photos. But it is something that once you get used to the principle, you can do without a grid. You can just do it in your mind's eye as you start taking your photographs. But it is to balance a photo without doing what is really tempting, again, especially in our sort of day of snapshot photograph tendency, which is to stick the subject of our photo straight in the middle of the photograph. When we do that, we really throw the photograph out of balance, because anything other than that single subject that exists in the photo automatically, tips the photo out of balance. So this design rule was developed to balance photographs without putting something in the middle. The rule of thirds places, as it says here, the main focus at these intersections of the vertical and horizontal grids that we kind of use in our mind's eye. But I'm going to show you some examples here that actually draw that grid on top of a photograph so you can see where those intersections lie. So in this first photograph, again, it's kind of small, but this is a very simple photo of a man sitting in a diner, which would have been very, very easy to place this guy dead center in the photo, and because he's clearly the subject of the photo. But if you notice, by putting his face, which again, with a portrait like this, this could be a story about this man, it could be a story about this diner. By placing his face at this intersection of the line of the third vertically, the first third, both vertically and horizontally, and placing his entire subject in this vertical third, there's not a lot over here in the right 2/3 of the photograph other than some context of the diner, but it really balances the photo and gives it some visual appeal. Another one here of this biker rally. I know that the grid somewhat obscures this big biker who's smoking a cigar, but we put his face, we put that puff of cigar smoke right at this intersection vertically and horizontally. And even if we look at the secondary subjects, we put another biker right here in this intersection. And we avoid dead center subject matter, either vertically or horizontally. And it just gives a sense of balance. Here you see this sort of flow right to left from face to face to face, like we talked about with horizontal orientation. And then lastly, I left the grid off of this one. This is another photograph from the aftermath of the attacks on 9/11. And we can see that we don't have these three firefighters, even the face of this firefighter, dead center where it could be. It would have been really easy to fill this frame up with just these guys' faces. And remember, we just talked about getting close and how important it is to zoom in and get the emotion on the face. But in this photograph, if we had done that, while these faces certainly are emotional, and they could be their own photograph in and of themselves, by zooming out, giving a larger frame, we see the devastation of the attack, and that gives the photo even more context. And again, placing them on this right third of the photograph where the subject matter is in this intersection really increases the balance and the effect of the storytelling of the photo. Just to sum up all of our photo composition rules, I'm not going to sum up through each one of them, but what I would like to say is that if you notice that in a lot of these photographs, even in the ones that are still on the screen right now, there's overlap. We could argue that there's a leading line here. We could argue that this is, the principle of rule of thirds and of horizontal, and maybe some others. And so these do not exist in a vacuum. They're not only one and of themselves. They also do exist in combination with one another. The last thing I'll say is that sometimes the best rule to follow in composition is none of them. There's an old saying in photography is that learn all the rules and then break them. And so even though we have these principles that are solid and provable and workable and really can make our photos better, sometimes the best photo breaks the rules. And so while I want you to really learn these principles and use them, sometimes the best photos betray them.